Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Hello, everyone. My guest for this episode is a very special person. His name is Omar Almajali. He's done all kinds of things professionally, from being a strategy consultant to being a program manager to being a business coach to being a podcast host. This episode is really about two things. It's about pursuing your dreams and taking the steps you need to take to follow your dreams. As we discussed in the episode, pursuing your dreams is hard, largely because of social stigma. Hopefully, this episode can inspire people to take the leap of faith. This episode is also about the growing popularity and acceptance of a new type of media in the Middle East, which is podcasting. Although Omar has been involved in multiple organizations, from Monitor Deloitte to Digital Dubai, he went on to start a podcast. And that was unusual at the time, especially in the Middle East. Omar is the host of the One Day podcast, which holds discussions with movers and shakers from the region. Omar then outdid himself again in terms of pursuing unusual projects, and he left corporate Dubai so he could follow his passion and get involved in filmmaking and acting. This episode was originally recorded a few months ago, and I'm glad I waited this long to upload the episode, because the US presidential elections really highlighted the importance of podcasting. People are calling this election the podcast election because of how President-elect Donald Trump leveraged big podcasts to his advantage. And this is not unusual. Historically, successful presidential candidates are typically the ones who master the new and emerging type of media. So for FDR, it was radio. For JFK, it was TV. For Reagan, it was cable. For Obama, it was social media. And once these presidents validated the new form of media, they took off in terms of adoption. This year, podcasting was the medium of choice. Trump appeared on podcasts like Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, and this past weekend with Theo Von. And just to highlight how impactful this was, the Donald Trump Joe Rogan podcast interview has over 50 million views on YouTube alone. And that is way more than any one cable network could ever hope to achieve. I think the election is evidence that podcasting is here to stay and will only grow in importance, and I think this for two reasons. One, podcast is long form, and therefore it is a more intimate type of media compared to others. Guests are usually relaxed and discuss a variety of topics, professional and personal. And after a few podcast episodes, you really feel like you know the guest pretty well. There's also research on this that shows how trust and credibility can be built through 7 hours of interaction, which doesn't necessarily have to be in person. It can happen through content, which makes sense. That's why you have people who feel very strong emotional connections to celebrities and athletes that they've never even met and don't even know. And the second reason is that the average podcast listener is young. In the US, the average age of podcast listeners is 34 versus 70 for cable. And as populations continue to age and millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha become the dominant generation in any society, that society will inevitably consume more digital content. And you can see this in the data with podcast ad revenues, podcast listenership, and the number of podcasts that are coming out every year. I think podcasting as a form of media is going to grow in importance, and I'm excited to see how that will play out, specifically in the Middle East. Anyway, I hope you enjoy my discussion with Omar. I certainly did. Enjoy. Omar, welcome.
Thanks so much, Muhammad, and thanks for having me here. I'm happy to be one of your very first few guests, I'm assuming, right?
Yes, number 2, actually.
Number two. Well, I mean, listen, I'm proud of you for starting this podcast, for putting yourself out there. It's not easy, putting content out there for the universe to see. But I'm proud of you and of your mission.
Thank you. Everyone is going to be learning a lot from you today, and I'm using this as kind of like a free consultation session on how to run a podcast properly. Maybe we can start there. You have the One Day podcast. I think you have about 50 episodes out so far.
Yeah. Well,
And
thank you so much. Well, anything I'm going to share is going to be absolutely from my very humble experience. I, by no means, am an expert in podcasting. I'm just someone who happened to stumble upon a passion and sort of acted towards it. Yes, the One Day podcast, I started it a few years ago, back in 2021. And the initial idea of the podcast was to interview success stories from the region, because at that point, back in 2021, the region wasn't exploding in podcast or Arabic content or Middle Eastern content as much as it is today. And I felt that I was consuming a lot of Western podcast and Western success stories. So I felt like we were importing a lot of success stories from the outside, and we had a lot of incredible success stories in our backyards here in the Middle East. So that was sort of the spark that got me to think about why not start a podcast where I can start interviewing success stories and people who have interesting stories from the region, so that we can at least have role models that we could look up to from our backyards here. So that was the initial idea. And then I'm like, yeah, what does it take to start a podcast? Let me buy a mic and an HD webcam from Amazon. I'll let you ask whatever questions you want regarding this, or however you want to take it. But yeah, I just literally Googled the minimal equipment that I need to start a podcast, got them from Amazon, and started reaching out to people and started recording episodes online.
yeah, I mean, it is actually fascinating how media and like how social media can amplify your efforts. You literally just need a webcam and a laptop. You don't even need the webcam, to be honest. A laptop and just a phone to contact people and just say, hey, can you come on my podcast?
100%, man. It doesn't take much. And funny enough, I had this conversation with you, I think a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And then a week before that, there was also this lady who reached out to me, and she's like, listen, I know you have a podcast and an Instagram page, and I just wanted to reach out. I got introduced to her through a mutual friend, and she's like, listen, I want to start a podcast, but I've been talking to people and I have friends in the filmmaking space, and they've been they're telling me I need to get this sort of equipment, and I need to have a mixer, and I need to have the proper studio lighting and all of that, which has inhibited her from starting a podcast, because she thought that it does take a lot for her to start a podcast. And I'm like, you really don't. All you need is a mic and a webcam, and if you have proper lighting, that's an extra factor, and that's it. You book a you book a guest, and it's really all about the conversation. And you've got a bunch of software that would allow you to mix and edit video easily, and online streaming platforms that would allow for a podcast conversation like the one we're on now, and a bunch of options for webcams and mics that range in prices. So really, you don't need much to start a podcast.
I agree. Actually, I think she might have asked the wrong people. It reminds me of this quote that I think my grandfather once said: barbers will always want to cut hair. So if you go to someone like someone in cinematography and you ask them how to film something, they're going to always give you like the over the top answer. I think only entrepreneurs are the guys who know how to do things for like the bare minimum cost and effort, basically just putting anything out there regardless of quality.
Yeah, man. And as I told you, you just start from there, and then organically your journey in the podcasting or content creation realm is going to allow you to grow, and you're going to learn things along the way, and you're going to want to upgrade certain things. But it really all starts with starting. You just have to start with one episode and the next and the third and the fourth, and just put a few episodes under your belt, and then look back and ask yourself, how can I improve my production value, even if it's slightly, even if it's just doing the podcasts during the day, because during the day there's proper lighting in my room, and it could be literally zero cost upgrades that you could do here and there. And it also depends on your budget. And if at some point you're able to monetize your podcast and up your production value, that's awesome. So I think the biggest and the hardest step, as cliche as it sounds, and everyone says it, but really it's just, you just got to start, man. And you just got to start putting stuff out there and seeing how, where that takes you.
I agree. I think people are so focused on being perfect. You're never perfect at anything you do for the first time. Like, it's very inspiring seeing babies try to walk. So they always just they keep falling, and they keep picking themselves up, and they see other people walking, and they know that one day I'm going to be like them, and they manage. So I don't know how we lost that as we grow up, but I
know, man. It's so sad. Honestly, we are our biggest enemies when it comes to getting out of our comfort zone and doing things that sort of scare us for no reason, because it doesn't take much. And sometimes we do amplify fears in our head, and sometimes our subconscious does that because it wants to keep us in the comfort zone. But as soon as you leave the comfort zone, you're like, wow, I managed to do that micro step. Let me add another micro step on that. And the next thing you know, you've added a few steps, and you're just at a different level, looking down and thinking, wow, I managed to get here from there, and who would have thought?
Yeah, I was watching this video. This guy was explaining how Mr. Beast, who's one of the most, if not the most successful YouTuber, who has probably 300 million followers across all his channels, he gives advice to people who always come to him and ask him for advice on how to be a YouTuber. And his advice is make 100 videos and be conscious about the next video you make as you get to that 100. So just make one thing better, whether it's the thumbnail, whether it's the audio, whether it's whatever. And once you get to 100, then we'll talk. But if you haven't gotten to 100, you haven't even tried.
Yes.
And he's like, two things happen. Either one, they never try. They just ask for advice and they kind of give up at some point and they never go back to him. Or two, they get to 100 and they don't need to go back to him because they figured it out. So he's like, it's the best kind of advice that you can give.
Just try, man. Just start putting stuff out there. It doesn't take much. It is, in Arabic, there's a saying, which means if you really think of it as a big deal, it is going to be a big deal. If you think that it doesn't take much, then it really won't take much.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have 50 episodes. How did you start? How did you contact your first guest? How did you go from the production value you had at episode 1 to episode 50? Because by the time you got to number 50, things were much more enhanced, thumbnails and all that, and production value. And then how do you see yourself moving forward to number 100, 200, 500?
Yeah. So my process was, okay, now that I have my cute little equipment, next thing I need to book a guest. So I started looking at the top 50 young movers and shakers, or just the top 50 entrepreneurs in the region and the Middle East, and just going through that list and creating a database on Excel for a potential list of prospects that I could reach out to and who happen to be interesting, or who happen to have built a successful company, or have some sort of a success story or an interesting background that I could talk about. And yeah, I started this Excel sheet with a list of I started with a list of maybe 50 to 100 prospects, and it was organized by name, industry, sector, and why am I choosing this person? Like, what's interesting about them? And then the next thing was, okay, now that I have those people, how am I going to reach out to them? So I started just putting in the contact information on that Excel sheet. And I got that through either Rocket Reach, which is like a software online that allows you that essentially gives you access to contact and email addresses of people or
A
public
strategy
persona.
consultant's tool that is very famous amongst the big consulting firms.
I've never used it in consulting. I've actually prior to my podcast experience, I had never heard of it actually. But I was like, how can I reach this person? Or I would sometimes search for a person, and you know, these websites would come up in your search, and I started exploring a few of them, and I stumbled across Rocket Reach and found it to be the most reliable. So that was my first. So I would I would go to Rocket Reach, try and find an email address. If that did not work, I would also try to reach out to these people through their social media platforms, whether that be Instagram or LinkedIn. And yeah, and then so now that I've accumulated the list of names and their contacts, then starts the outreach process, and I started reaching out to these people, and I would get almost 50% response rate, which is not bad. Yeah, which is not bad. At times you're completely ignored, and at times people would start a conversation with you and then never respond. So you're gonna so when you start your outreach, be ready to experience all sorts of responses from people, and don't be too hard on yourself in that process.
So let's just rewind for a second. Your podcast is called the One Day Podcast, and you mentioned that you are selective in who you choose to come onto your podcast. So could you just tell me what the message behind the One Day Podcast is, and then also what you kind of look for in terms of assessing a guest?
Yeah. So the One Day Podcast, the reason why it's called the One Day Podcast is because we, you know, each of us, I believe, has a dream or has had a dream in the past, and it's always, you know, one day I'm gonna lose some weight. One day I'm gonna be able to take that leap in my career. One day I'm gonna be able to, I don't know, explore my passions and things that I love doing. And it's always one day in the future. And why can't that one day be, you know, day one? Why can't that one day be today or tomorrow? So my message is everyone has the capacity and the capability to live out their dreams or passions and aspirations. And sometimes all it takes is a formula or a success story, or to listen to a story of someone who has done it. So that was the driving factor behind my search and the profiles of people that I reach out to. These are people who have put themselves out there, who have turned these one days to day ones, and were able to reach some sort of a dream, or built a dream company, or again took that career leap and pivoted to a completely different realm, into something that has brought them passion and joy. So anyone with an interesting story who took that leap and was able to, instead of daydream, actually take steps in real life. And
they just did it.
They just did it.
Yeah. I really think Nike has the best slogan. Just do it.
Just do it, man. Just do it. Honestly, just do it. Doesn't, yes. And again, the biggest, I guess, hurdle in that process is our mental process and the blockages that we mentally place in front of ourselves that are really an illusion. They don't exist.
Yeah.
They exist in your head.
Yeah. So has your response rate improved from episode 1 to episode 49 or 50? And did it go from like 50% to 90% or?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it does improve, because when you reach out to people, you're no longer I'm Omar Almajali, and I aspire to launch a podcast. I'm Omar Almajali, who has launched 2 seasons of my podcast, and I've got these, X number of episodes under my belt. Here's my YouTube page. You could check out the episodes of the previous guests that I've had. I've featured some big names such as X, Y, and Z, and obviously that's an easier sell, and people are more likely to respond to something that's proven. And when they check out your podcast and your content, and they think you're relatively legit, or someone who is trying, and who's yes, young but ambitious, they tend to respond to that.
Okay,
I don't have a percentage. I don't have a percentage of how much that has went up, but
I'm sure it's very close to 100%.
No, I wouldn't say 100%. La, man, people disappoint you sometimes. Your heroes can't disappoint you. But no, I mean, I've also witnessed an incredible amount of generosity from a lot of busy people who I was thinking, wow, this person found some time for an hour of a conversation with a random person who has reached out to them, who's not really that big. So I do appreciate those people as well.
Yeah, you've had some pretty influential people come onto your podcast. Could you talk about a few of them, some of the biggest lessons and challenges when it came to talking to your guest, and then also having them open up in front of you? Like, how do you deal with that? Because you've had some guests who have really been very vulnerable with you.
Yes. Yeah, I've had some big names on my podcast, including VP of Amazon, Director General of Smart Bay, Dr. Aisha, Zain Al-Qaisi. I've had some big media personalities such as Hassan al-Sheikh. Also, social media influencers locally in Jordan and regionally, tech founders. So a diverse pool of, I would say, just movers and shakers, and people who have, as I said, put themselves out there. And so you're answering your question in regards to how do I deal with, like, what are some of the most memorable insights? Across all my conversations with these guests, I heard a lot of follow your gut. I've heard a lot of, you got to be courageous and bold in your vision and in your dream, and you just got to put yourself out there and go after it. I've heard a lot of, you don't really figure out where you want to go in life. I've had people in their 50s, successful people and entrepreneurs in their 50s. I'm not trying to say that to depress people, but sometimes we are too hard on ourselves trying to figure out the question of, where am I trying to go, and where am I trying to reach? Who am I trying to be? And one thing I've learned from these extremely successful people is that you never really do arrive. It's a constant striving, and it's a constant unfolding of your potential. And a lot of them told me that I couldn't have imagined, in a million years, that I would be where I am today. I started with A, and I ended up doing C in life, and and that is something that resonated with me a lot, because that's something that I constantly try to think of. You're asked sometimes in your interviews or your job interviews, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I think that with that question comes a lot of pressure. Not everyone has that answer figured out, and that's okay. And that's one of the biggest lessons that resonated with me and stuck with me.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you agree with that?
I think so. I mean, I think people are too calculated. I was one of them in planning the future, but I've been humbled a few times in my life. So I stopped trying to be too calculated. You just want to be directionally correct.
Mm-hmm.
And I think John Lennon really showed a lot of wisdom when he was younger, and his teacher asked him, "What do you want to be when you're older?" And he said, "Happy."
Yeah.
And then the teacher said, "I don't think you understand the assignment." And he responded by saying, "I don't think you understand life."
Yes.
So
That's so true, man. He summarized life in this little episode of his with his teacher, because that truly is what it boils down to. And yeah, one of, I would say, like, amongst the most memorable experiences I've had on my podcast are those moments when my guests were extremely vulnerable with me. I've had Maher Qaddura, who's a big serial regional entrepreneur, big philanthropist, huge personality, like he's a keynote public speaker, all the things. And I happen to know about his background and his personal background, personal family stories. He lost a son of his, who was, I guess, at the age of 16 or 8 or 17. It was a car accident, an extremely tragic car accident and death that really shook Amman and Jordan, where I'm from. So growing up, I've heard about the death of his son. So yeah, I had the cool privilege of having him on my podcast, and throughout our conversation, we talked about business and investments and everything that he's known for professionally. But then the one thing that stuck with me the most is the conversation about the death of his son and how he managed to deal with it and deal with grief, and how he managed to turn that tragic story of his into a purpose. And today he's a big philanthropist in Jordan, and the driver for that was or came from the death of his son, and he was able to use that energy and navigate it in the right direction. I've also had Lucien Merabi, one of the biggest professional negotiators in our region, and one of the most memorable conversations I've had in my podcast history was with her, when she was telling me about how she heard about the moment she heard about the fatal disease that her son has. And she had this moment with him in the shower once where she had to pick him up. He's like a 7 or an 8-year-old kid, and his legs stopped working basically due to a fatal disease, and they had this moment in the shower where she had to pick him up and put him on the chair and shower him, because he wasn't able to do that himself anymore. And he was asking her, "Mom, are my legs going to ever work again?" And she's like, "Listen, I do not know. All I know is that we're just going to keep trying every single day to find a solution and a cure." And that has become her biggest self-negotiation, waking up every morning and reminding herself that today I'm going to be hopeful, and today I'm going to find a cure. And eventually, later on, I heard that they managed to find some sort of a breakthrough in their journey. So yeah, these are the little stories that live with me the most, I would say.
Well, that's very intense.
Yeah.
I wish the best for her and for her son.
Yeah.
So you now finished 2 seasons, if I'm not mistaken, or
3 seasons.
3 seasons.
3
Okay.
seasons.
What are your plans moving forward with the podcast?
So I finished 3 seasons. My third season was actually my third season was purely in Arabic. My second season was a mix of Arabic and English. And then I kind of pivoted towards complete Arabic content, because I don't know, I just felt like some of the topics that I talk about, I would want to see more Arabic content of that sort. And I wanted to influence the local youth, the regional youth, when it comes to certain topics around mindset and personal development. So yeah, I pivoted to Arabic. So that happened on my third season, and then I decided to just pause my podcast for now, because I am rethinking my strategy for the fourth season. I really do want to take my podcast / content creation journey to the next level. I want to, and I'm still unsure of what that means, but for the past 3 seasons, I've been spending money on the podcast with obviously zero income coming from it. So I thought, let me just pause my podcast for now and rethink the strategy, because I would want to, I want to be able to focus on the aspect of the podcasting that I'm mostly passionate about, which is the conversation and the guests and the story and the script and that content, versus the whole value chain of doing everything from editing to putting putting the episodes out there. And obviously that requires budget. So I'm at a point right now where I am just looking at potential options for how I could up my budget to up my production value and sort of take my podcast and everything around it and the marketing around it to the next level.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. So what are your thoughts on podcasting in the Middle East right now, the ecosystem as a whole? You were in Podfest, which is like a convention kind of thing that took place in Dubai. I think it was last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it was 2 years ago. But there was one last year and there was one 2 years ago. I think I went to the one I went to was either the first or the second edition, if I'm not mistaken.
How was that? What was your experience there?
It was great. It was great. Well, I honestly was surprised that I even got an invitation from Podfest, but someone in the UAE came across my podcast and my Instagram page, and they're like, "Listen, it would be great to have you as a guest." And so they invited me to that, and I was like, "Sure, I would love to actually make it to an event that's all about podcasting, which is unprecedented in the region, because truly podcasting is becoming an ecosystem. It's a powerful platform that is starting to be more understood. It wasn't a medium that was understood in the past, and because of that, there was no funding around it. There was no interest in it. But now the value and the power of podcasting as an audio medium is through the roof in the region. And that's why we're seeing an explosion of podcasters and people putting themselves out there and starting podcasts and people monetizing it and looking at it as just this powerful content medium, which was not true just 3 years ago. So there's an exponential growth, I think, in seeing the value and in growth of the ecosystem of the podcasting space in the Middle East, which is great. I love to see that. So, and then because of that, and as a byproduct of that, you start seeing everything across the value chain materialize. Now there are more podcast studios for you to rent. Back in the day when I started, that did not exist.
The ecosystem has grown, and now there are podcast studios across Dubai, Riyadh. I think there's even one. There's actually a podcast studio in Jeddah as well. So, yeah, I mean, the ecosystem has been.
Exactly. I was just saying that because of this growth in the ecosystem, now you start seeing things growing across the value chain. You start seeing more podcast studios offering, you could just go and rent out a studio, which honestly did not exist a few years ago. And you start seeing events like these that bring podcasters and people of similar minds together, and these are truly powerful networking events where you could potentially meet a partner or potentially meet a guest. And the panel and the cool thing about that event, that it was a purely homegrown, celebrating homegrown podcast brands and homegrown podcast personalities from the region. So yeah, when you see that happening and flourishing, you start seeing an ecosystem, and especially when people start seeing the value in that, they start monetizing it. So now me seeking funds for my 4th season I'm sure it's much easier than seeking funds back when I started my season 1, because I don't think we had big believers in podcasting in the region back then.
Yeah. So one thing that I really like about what I see in the ecosystem is that you have a lot of people, locals, starting their own podcasts, and you have a lot of people, locals, also consuming that content. And so we are transitioning from a time whereby the big broadcasters who had all the capital and power and whatever were able to, they were the ones who determined what content people would be consuming, but now it's more democratized, and that power is moving into the hands of people who don't necessarily, just everyday people essentially. And that's one thing. Another thing is you're seeing this with podcasts, but also with filmmaking, is that now you have like a homegrown ecosystem in cinematography, for example. And that's actually something else I wanted to talk to you about. So you mentioned that you want to up the production value. Something you did not too long ago is you kind of diverted away from your strategy consultant track to try the ropes at filmmaking and cinematography. And it's very interesting that that's something that you are passionate about. Could you talk a little bit about that and about that time period?
Yeah. My passion is in filmmaking and acting. I was a theater kid back in high school, and I loved everything about acting, and I've always been fascinated by the filmmaking world. I've always been fascinated by how things are done behind the scenes. Ever since I was a kid, you'd find me on YouTube watching behind the scenes footage of how movies were made and how actors would act in between scenes. So it's a bug that I've had in me and a passion that I've had in me ever since I was a kid. And it has always been a dream of mine to tap into that space. But you know how when you start your professional journey, sometimes and you go through you go through adulthood and you start putting your dreams aside and on the shelf, because it's at some point in your life you were either told that path doesn't make sense, or it's a path that you don't see a lot of your friends taking, so you don't take it because it's associated with high risk. Or there are certain also spaces and career paths that come with shame in our region, and that happens to be the arts and the acting and the singing space. It's incredible the amount of friends I have who have beautiful voices and they're doing nothing with it just because there's this sense of shame and they're embarrassed and they keep it to themselves. So I've always had this passion of mine and I never acted on it, and it was destroying me from the inside. So when I started my podcast, my podcast, which was all about the one day dreams, and I started interviewing guests and about how they were able to reach their dreams and reach and pursue their passions, yet I was being a big hypocrite being the host of the podcast. I wasn't living out my dream. So my podcast was, in a sense, it sort of helped me take that leap in my career. So 2 years ago, I was working with Smart Dubai, which is now called Digital Dubai, and then I decided to take a 2 years leave. I left the corporate world. I left corporate Dubai. I went to Bali for a month actually on a solo trip, and then went back to Jordan. And I knew that for the next 2 years, all I'm going to do is I'm going to try and tap into the filmmaking space and the acting space and see if I'm able to experience any breakthroughs. And I took it seriously, and I was fortunate enough to have been part of some incredibly exciting projects. Like we shot a show with Gordon Ramsay in Jordan last year, and I also I was part of the production team, and I also did the scene with him, which was really cool. And I worked on some Hollywood productions. I've acted in a few movies, and it's something that I'm still doing, by the way. So it's not something that I've done. It's something that I'm going to continue doing alongside my freelance consulting, because it's a passion of mine. It makes me happy, and I'm not gonna not do it because it doesn't make sense financially. I'm gonna make it make sense, basically.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. That makes sense, and I think you're in the right place in the right time, to be completely honest.
Yes. Let's see, man, where my journey takes me. All I know is that I have this dream and I have this passion and I want to take it somewhere. And I know that I will get somewhere, and it doesn't have to be somewhere big. Um, just the fact that over the past few years I've been able to go on sets act but also produce and interact with like A-listers, and these are the sort of experiences that make you experience life truly, because whatever makes you happy from the inside, when you're living out that dream and that passion of yours, you're just like in a state of flow, and you know that it feels right in your gut, it feels right in your heart that this is where I'm supposed to be. So just although I'm doing strategy consulting now, which is also something, I wouldn't say it's a passion of mine, I think it's just a professional career of mine that keeps my mind stimulated, which I like. But yeah, I will continue to pursue that on the side, the sort of like filmmaking and content creation.
So for people who don't have a background in that, and you said you have a background from your high school days, but for people who don't have a background in that, how do they immerse themselves in something before going into it? What did you do? And do you even think that's necessary? Should just do it?
Background and what? And content creation, or filmmaking,
Let's
or
say filmmaking, for example. You said I think you were involved as a producer or director in the Gordon Ramsay thing. How did you learn about what to do and how to do it?
I knew nothing about this space actually when I decided to take the leap from working for a government entity in Dubai. So I started my career in strategy consulting, and then I worked for Digital Dubai or Smart Dubai government, and then I took that leap in my career. And when I took that leap, I actually had no idea. I had zero clue what this world means or how it operates. All I knew is that I had a passion and I wanted to explore it, because I knew that I had to be close to it to decide whether it's something that I want to pursue or not pursue. But the one thing that I wasn't going to live with is the regret of what if. So going into it, I had my first job was literally a cast assistant of a 7-year-old. So I was following the 7-year-old on set just to make sure that he doesn't faint on set because of a extremely hot summer day in Jordan. That was my first job that got me into that space. And then I started networking from there. And then I got like bigger gigs and I met bigger directors and I went to auditions and I just put myself out there. But that was my first job. And I remember on that day on set, I was thinking to myself, did I just really leave a high paying, prestigious government job in Dubai to feed a child on set? But I knew that that's exactly what I had to do, and I knew that it's gonna take that for me to reach bigger levels and bigger dreams, and I just did it, and I put myself out there, and I was willing to start from scratch.
What I've noticed is that it's always the first job in a new field that's the most humbling, and that is why most people never continue. And then it just goes up after that. And if you could just ride the wave, if you could just hang in there, then it's usually very worth it.
I completely agree, man. Honestly, it is always worth it. And you just have to start from somewhere, right? And that's the first gig I happened to get. And I just wanted to be on set and I wanted to see what happens behind the scenes. And I just wanted to be there when a director says cut, rolling. I just wanted to be in the space and I did not want to watch it from afar. I wanted to be in it to see if that is an actual passion of mine or if that is an imagined passion of mine.
Yeah.
So that
That's
was
incredible.
Yeah.
Can we talk about the Misk Foundation Startup School Masterclass?
Yes.
So what was that about?
Yeah, that was one of the really cool projects I got the chance to work on last year. I've been doing freelance strategy consulting, and sometimes I get the opportunity to work on really cool projects. And the cool thing about this particular project is that it was a mix of consulting or project management, and there was an element of content creation and production. So this was the project was about so you've heard of the Misk Foundation,
Yeah. Can you
which
just
is
explain what that is and what this project was exactly?
the Misk Foundation is a nonprofit foundation that is started by MBS. And the objective of this nonprofit foundation is just to sort of create value in the ecosystem and in the entrepreneurship ecosystem and provide value to entrepreneurs in Saudi, but also in the region. And they do that through programs, they do that through content, and just a bunch of verticals that they have. So one of the verticals, or one of the products, or one of the projects they had, was this platform called the Misk Startup, Startup School Masterclass, where they bring top-notch entrepreneurs regionally and internationally to teach topics on entrepreneurship. This platform, the Misk Startup School Masterclass platform, featured some incredible guests such as the two guests that I got on my season, the one that I got to work on was Chris Barton, the co-founder of Shazam, Mohammed Al-Madani, the co-founder of Classera, Ahmed Al-Zaini, the founder of Foodix, and Nicholas Ostberg, the founder of Delivery Hero. So big names, top-notch entrepreneurs regionally and internationally, which was an incredible experience. I got to meet these people in person on set when we were shooting these master classes with them. And I got to work with them and their teams to create content. And it was just it was a fun project because it had all of the elements that I was either professionally good at or that I'm passionate about. It had content creation, it had project management, there was shoot involved and some on-set action. So that was fun. And the two courses so I got to work on season 3 of that masterclass platform, and the two courses that we worked on or launched as part of the 3rd season were scaling and growth, which is a hot topic and not really taught, especially in the region, because scaling is a big issue in the region.
Yeah.
And scale ups, they have their own set of challenges that they face in the region. And the other topic was strategic thinking and decision making. So really cool topics, soft skill, hard skill.
I think what came to mind is you were originally in strategy, then you tried to do, and you moved towards filmmaking, and this is like in the synthesis. It's like where these two worlds combine. But I really think that a lot of the times it's in the synthesis where a lot of value is added. Like you have people who are pure play one thing or pure play the other, but when you find that niche, then that's where people generally thrive, because it's just a very unique and kind of untouched area, especially in the Middle East. I personally see you being more involved with things like that.
Yeah, no, I remember when I was telling my friends that I'm doing this project that's consulting and filmmaking at the same time. They're like, wow, you just hit the jackpot with that one. And it was something that I really enjoyed. Everything from creating content to working with these top-notch founders to putting the content out there and marketing it and thinking through post-production. It was a great learning experience, and at the same time it's something that I really did enjoy doing. And I also, the reason why I was vetted for that project is because I happened to come from these both worlds. So I guess the message here is that when you start doing more of what you like and you enjoy in life, you open up the doors of opportunities for you to do more of that. And you never know how it could manifest in what form.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. You're a graduate of King's Academy. Not too long ago, there was a picture of you with King Abdullah. I think it was,
Yes.
Was it the Silver Jubilee or the Golden Jubilee celebration?
Silver Jubilee celebration.
So
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that experience, and then your time at King's, and maybe how your earlier years in King's, before that and after that, kind of contributed to your career path, and then to being the type of person who is like really into filmmaking, content creation.
Yeah. So yeah, I went to high school in Amman, Jordan, and the school that I went to was King's Academy. The reason why it's called King's Academy is because it was founded by His Majesty King Abdullah. His Majesty King Abdullah, he went to high school in Massachusetts to Deerfield Academy. So he wanted to create and emulate a similar boarding school experience for Middle Eastern students and international students, but he wanted to create a cutting-edge educational experience for high schoolers in the region and for the region. That was what was cool about King's Academy, is that that school did not only focus on in classroom curriculums and student experiences, they placed so much emphasis on your personality beyond the classrooms, and it offered so much opportunities for that. So we had what we used to call co-curriculars or extracurriculars that we had to that we had to sort of subscribe to, or every semester you get to choose one or two extracurriculars that were mandatory for you, and these extracurriculars ranged from fencing to horseback riding to theater to MUN to anything. Like, it was a literally long list. Chess sort of community was also part of that list. So anything you could think of was there, and I think the reason for that is they wanted you to have a holistic educational experience that not only focused on classroom curriculums and books, but also focused on shaping your personality beyond your classroom. And that has contributed significantly to me, to I guess, to my growth journey, because what King's Academy provided me with, it allowed me, first of all, to experience my potential as, I wouldn't say a leader, but as someone who has the potential and the capacity to take on leadership positions. Because in King's, I was involved in, or I happened to take lead of a number of communities. I was a founding member of the Model United Nations. I was also the class president. And I guess I was just given a lot of opportunity for me to experience the fact that, oh, okay, so I can do that at a young age. What is going to stop me to do that again at a later age, whether in my professional career or whatever, or in college? So that experience that experience that I had in King's, I guess, allowed me to unlock some potential in me. And sometimes you got to see it to believe it. And when you see yourself doing things, it just becomes a belief system in you. So I think at a young high school age, I started believing that I could do these things, and that I am a multifaceted personality or human, and I'm not just a student. So I think that was a big value out of King's Academy. So going back to your question, yes, that picture was with His Majesty King Abdullah II, and it was in celebration of his silver. It was a silver jubilee occasion, meaning that he became king 25 years ago, and the whole of Jordan was celebrating him. And for Kings, we hosted the gala dinner where we invited like the biggest donors, because also one thing that's really cool about King's Academy is that 50% of its students are students through financial aid, and
Wow.
and 50% of the student body are students who come from various social backgrounds and economic backgrounds. So which was really cool about the school, because it created this melting pot of people coming from all sorts of backgrounds being bonded over this really cool holistic educational experience. And there was diversity. There was a diversity element to that, because we had students coming in from Saudi and from Syria and Lebanon, and international students. So I experienced diversity pre-college through King's Academy. So so that picture was taken in a silver jubilee gala dinner that we hosted, and I was the MC of the event, the master of ceremony. So with a colleague of mine, her name is Farah Matalqa, who is a social media influencer today, and we got the chance to just host the event and talk about King's Academy and and the value it added to our lives at such a young age, and the experiences that we personally had and shared with His Majesty. So that was a really cool experience.
That's great. Honestly, I'm a big proponent of education, not necessarily schooling. Education is a big thing for me. And I remember when King's, I don't know if it's when they opened, but at some point in like 2000, 9, 10, a lot of people that I knew started moving to King's. And I think one of the things it did was elevated the standard of education in the Middle East. So like the standard of schooling went up. And also another thing it did was it allowed a lot of people to study at King's, which is in an Arab country, rather than go abroad, which I think allowed them to be more rooted in their culture and in the region generally. So I think King's had like many areas in which it benefited a whole, generations of students.
Yes. Yes, it really did, man. Honestly, and it was because of those reasons that I talked about. The focus of looking at you not as a classroom student, but as a global citizen who's going to graduate and create impact out there. The melting pot of people from different economic and social backgrounds, from Jordan and from beyond of Jordan, international students. So and that alone is a learning experience, right? Interacting with people from all walks of life, speaking all sorts of different languages, coming from all different backgrounds of culture, is a learning experience and a layer of education in itself.
Yeah, I think extracurricular activities is really important. I was also watching this other video of this guy who was talking about this research, and these scholars or researchers were conducting research on children throughout their progression throughout the schooling years. And these kids who were like the age of 2 or 3 showed, I think 90% of them showed aptitude to become a genius. And then when they did the research again, I think 5 years later, that number dropped down to 60%. And when they did it again 5 years later, that number dropped down again to like 30%, until by the time they got to their 20s, the number was like 2% or 3%. And I think a large part of that is only focusing on pure academics and not extracurricular activities. And there's this quote, I don't know who said it, I think it was Albert Einstein. He was saying, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, then, I don't know, something like, you're just not doing it justice, essentially.
Man, 100%. What's really sad about traditional educational systems is that it's a one size fit all, and we're not a one size fit all species. We're just not. We're very different in the way we learn, and we're very different in the things that we're passionate about, and we're just completely different personalities. And every single breathing being on this earth is a unique soul with a unique personality, and having to fit everyone into one system is just extremely unfair. And yes, unfortunately, we do lose our genius as we grow up because of these educational and social conditionings that that we go through as we grow up, as we're told you're not allowed to do this, as we're told no, you're asking the wrong question because it is out of scope, or your response doesn't make sense, or your question is stupid. And these things that we experience in the classroom, they play a big part in the way we grow up and perceive the world, and the way we are, or it impacts our propensity to explore and experiment as we grow up. Unfortunately, we tend to we are conditioned to think of life as this like one path. You go to high school and then you graduate, and then you go to college and you have to take internships so that you could get yourself a professional career, and it's a loop, it's a system, it's a matrix, honestly, that is embedded in us as kids. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Maybe for the next time you come on as a guest.
Yes.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
So just as we're wrapping up, what is your dream for yourself within the next 5 years? Where do you see Omar Almajali 5 years from now?
My dream for myself is really to live a fulfilled and a passionate life where I don't feel like there's a segregation between work and life.
Mm,
I want to be doing something that I'm so passionate about that it is intertwined in my life, and I don't see it as a job. I don't
mm.
see my life and my weeks are not divided up into weekends and weekdays. I do not want that. I want to just live life passionately, do things that I love, and happen to be making money from that. So what that is exactly, I'm yet to figure out. I have hints and I'm exploring them right now. I'm putting myself out there. I'm gathering data, and based on that, I'm going to be redirecting myself to hopefully get closer to that place where I truly do feel like, wow, I get to wake up every day and do this, and that's just incredible.
Would you say you're closer to that now than you were 2 years ago?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. 2 years ago, I was a dreamer. And today I'm someone who has done things, who has projects that are coming out. I actually do have the screening of one of the first movies I acted in
Wow.
Locarno Film Festival in Switzerland in 2 weeks that I'm gonna go and watch. I'm gonna watch myself on a big screen. Going to be a red carpet and press release and like a press release situation. So it's what something that I dreamed about, and now I'm actually living. So I'm definitely closer, and I'm not there yet. I'm nowhere near where I want to be in my head, but all I know is that I am on the path.
That's amazing. Well, I wish you the best of luck in this journey,
Thanks, man.
and I'm looking forward to seeing the progress you make. Before
Habibi.
we end, before we end, I just wanted to ask you a few rapid fire questions, just random questions that I want to start asking all my guests. So, number one, what are your what is your number one book recommendation, or the book that you gift the most?
Ooh. So few things come to mind. I'm a very spiritual person, so I do like these books that stimulate a sense of spirituality in them. So there's one called The Untethered Soul. But from a professional point of view, I think one book that changed the way I view life and career was The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. And the big message from that book was um, you don't have to work hard. You can work smart in life. And it also put in my perspective the idea um, that we actually, most professionals, we tend to trade time for money, and that happens to be a trap. And for you to live a financially fulfilled life or get closer to that, um, that's when you leave that equation and you start selling products or services for money without you having to trade your time for money. And you do that, there are now bajillion models for how you could do that. That's why one of the things that I've been exploring over the past few years is starting an online business where I could have an online passive income for myself so that I can pursue my passions and not have to trade my time for money. Completely different topic. But yeah, that book is a high recommendation.
100%. So Tim Ferriss is one of the most famous podcasters. I think he started
Yes.
his podcast after he wrote the book. I'm putting it out there from now. For this podcast, it is my dream to have Tim Ferriss on. So
Wow.
let's see where that gets me in 10 years.
You don't have to think about the how. You don't have to think about, all you need to think about is the what. And the universe will conspire to get Tim Ferriss on your podcast. And you just got to see it and it's going to happen. I promise you, he's going to be on your podcast. Tim Ferriss is one of those people who have really changed the way I view the world. Yes, his podcast, the Tim Ferriss Show, is one of the podcasts I used to listen to more often in the past than now. And that book changed my life. Yeah, Tim Ferriss is a great guy. And you're gonna
Yeah.
get him on your podcast one day, man.
So what is your dream home away from home? Where is your vacation destination that is not really a vacation because you don't believe in them? It's all one for you.
With my dream home away from home is Bali. One of it's not only a dream, but it's gonna become a reality. I do see myself living in Bali for a few months a year. When I left corporate Dubai and I left my career and I took that leap, as I told you, I went to Bali for 1 month on a solo trip, and Bali was an incredible experience in my journey, and I look back at it, and it truly did feel like my soul was home in that island.
So when I went to Bali for my honeymoon, two things stood out to me. Number one, the Indonesians are extremely kind and polite and
Generous, yes.
humble and generous people.
Very, very.
Yeah, and to an extent that is hard to comprehend, because
Yes.
it's just everyone.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, their food is delicious.
Yes. Food,
So
their nature, man, everything, their
yeah,
rituals. They how they pray. They have these what's it called? Like they always light incense, and they, I forgot what it's called, but they pay so much respect to their ancestors. At every corner, you see these little bouquets of flower and food, put in places, because that's just like something they do on a regular basis and every morning, in respect to the spirits they believe, or their ancestors. There are the culture there is extremely interesting. It's a mix of Muslim and Hindu and Buddhism. But yeah, no, I mean, if you are someone who's looking to restart their life, someone who's looking to immerse themselves in nature, someone who's looking for a calling, someone who's looking to pivot, I feel like Bali is a place where um, it's an island for second chapters. And I met a lot of people there who were on a similar journey and a wavelength that I was in. So that was also really cool.
Thank you so much, Omar, for taking the time and coming on. I really appreciate it. If people try to find you, where's the best place they can reach you?
They can reach me on Omar Almajali _. That's my public Instagram page, where I tend to post content on, either from my podcast, or you can just find me blabbing on a video talking about something about life or spirituality. So yeah, you could find me on there and connect with me there. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Muhammad. And I'm really proud of you for starting this podcast, for putting yourself out there, for starting the journey. 2 weeks ago, it was a thought, and you were just exploring it, and you wanted to ask me a few questions about it. And today, here you are, recording your second episode, and you're gonna get Tim Ferriss on your podcast one day. So I'm proud of you, man, and what you're doing is gonna inspire others to go out there and do their own thing as well.
I hope so. That's part of the objective.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much, Omar.
Habibi
Take
Muhammad,
care,
best
and
of luck, buddy.
thank you. We'll speak soon, inshallah.
Inshallah.